Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Piece by Piece, a collaborative conversation on gun violence, part of Alabama Values' ongoing Justice in Focus series, a narrative campaign encouraging the wider community to reimagine public safety. My name is Anisha Hardy, and it is an honor to welcome each of you to this vital discussion this evening. As we gather here, I want to just acknowledge this pressing and devastating impact, that gun violence does have on our communities. And also recognize that true change requires more than just a conversation, right? It demands collaboration, action, and a shared commitment to justice. So we are here not just to reflect on the challenges, but also to build solutions together. So I want to acknowledge that, also gun violence does not exist in a vacuum. The intersections of race, class, systemic inequities shape the way that gun violence and crimes are both experienced and addressed, often leading to, disproportionate impacts and criminalization in communities of color. And that these realities demand that we engage in this work with a commitment to justice and equity, acknowledging the root cause while also dismantling the systems that perpetuate the harm. So tonight we will hear from leaders, advocates, and change makers who bring, diverse perspectives and expertise and lived experiences to the table. Our conversation tonight isn't just about addressing gun violence. It is about reimagining community safety in a way that really centers the voices and the needs and the lived experiences of those most affected. And so, I hope that through this conversation, that you join us in exploring innovative solutions and examining policies that exist. And your presence here reflects a shared commitment to transforming how we approach these challenges. So I just want to thank you for being a part of this movement. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to our moderators, Jerone and Eric from the Flourish, Alabama, who will guide us through tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Oh, yeah, like Eric says, good people, beautiful people. My name is Jerone Hill. I'm the executive director of the Flourish, Alabama. And my brother.
I got you. Yeah. My name is Eric Melvin Jr. I'm creative director of the Flourish, Alabama. Good evening, everybody.
Yeah. We wanted to say thank you, first of all, to Alabama Values for partnering with us for this Justice in Focus event. We've been in talks with Anisha, with the team for a minute on different ways to collaborate. And when they brought us this Justice in Focus topic, there were a few different ways that we wanted to go about it. But as things developed here, especially in the city of Birmingham, and what we've seen going on as well with recent homecomings, the multiple, including, as my students were telling me at UA, we had an entire class on Monday just talking about what happened in Tuskegee. And we want to take the time to just send positive vibes and good energy towards the families and the people who are dealing with the traumatic events of gun violence, not just in Tuskegee, but across the state and across this country. Before we get into things, I wanted to just do something quick to ground us. I love doing affirmations, doing with my students, with my classes. So my speakers, y'all don't have to unmute. Y'all don't have to unmute. But I always say, let's take a deep and repeat after me. I am worthy. I am necessary. I am loved. My being is a blessing. All right. Thanks, y'all, for participating in that with me. Today's conversation, like Anisha mentioned, we will be talking specifically about gun violence. It's a tough topic. So we're going to treat it with care and with the respect that it deserves, and with these community members who are working daily, day in and day out to find ways to address these issues. Basically, some key takeaways that we want y'all to have from this are an overview of Alabama's current gun laws and statistics. We want to talk about different key issues and conflicts that lead to increased violence. Also putting forth some innovative solutions and reforms to improve community safety and how you can get involved in the movement for change, because it's going to take each and every one of us. And I'm going to turn it over to my brother, Eric, to introduce our speakers.
Appreciate that, Mon. Again, Eric Member Jr. Today we have some speakers from many different facets of the city of Birmingham, people with many different perspectives. We want to thank y'all, and we're honored to have y'all's time this evening. Just to introduce everybody, going down in no particular order. Jacques Austin, Executive Director of Brother Let's Talk. We have Leroy Maxwell Jr., Maxwell and Tillman Law Firm. We have Jerone Higgins, Principal at Hayes K8. We have Uche Bean, Director of Community Safety Initiatives for the City of Birmingham. And is Danny popping up in a second?
We're getting his figured out now.
No problem. And then we have Danny Carr, Jefferson County District Attorney, who will be joining us as soon as we get these technical difficulties together.
So we're gonna get. Oh, go ahead, E. We're gonna. I was gonna say we can start with our group question. Then I see here. It says with the questions, y'all. We want to just say 5 minutes or less. 5 minutes or less with the questions. I know we'll have a lot to say, but Eric, if you want to get us started with the group question.
I got you, Brody. Our esteemed panel. Legislative solutions such as enforcing bans or bump stocks have been the subject of significant debate and advocacy. Can each of you share your perspectives on how legislative actions can contribute to reducing gun violence, as well as where you believe these efforts may have limitations or unintended consequences? And I can repeat that if you need me to. Can each of you share your perspectives on how legislative actions can contribute to reducing gun violence, as well as where you believe these efforts may have limitations or unintended consequences?
Well, I'll chime in first. And I guess you're talking legislative actions that can contribute to reducing gun violence. And I think about legislation that reduces access to certain types of weapons, or access to those things that that contribute to gun violence. I think that can help reduce it. I think when Alabama moved to, there's no need to carry a pistol permit, that for everyone, it gave sort of this mentality that anybody and everybody should walk around with a gun or with a pistol. But I think with certain legislation, it can reduce access to those things, those weapons, or whatever it is that people are using to harm one another. Just like we have legislation regarding certain prescription medication. I remember a time when, it's maybe before you all's time, but they didn't used to put the seal on certain aspirin bottles or the prescription bottles. And then there was legislation that came about that, it had to have that, I guess, extra access to prevent people from going into stores and putting items in those bottles that would hurt people. So it's, I think legislation would help to limit access. That would probably help to reduce.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. Leroy Maxwell. We don't have great legislation in the state when it comes to issues that directly prevent head-on gun violence. We're a state where even having a silencer on a gun is legal. We're just one of those states that promotes open carry, promotes a sort of a gun industry. And so while there may not be legislation that's on the books that I think directly affects and contributes to decreasing the amount of gun violence, I do think there's legislation like the silencer, like as he mentioned, the open carry where you could carry without a permit. That right there creates an environment that says that, the doors are wide open for the gun industry to come in here, to sell, for it to flourish here in our state. And when you have more supply and more guns here, and it's more readily accessible, you get the side effect of that is that you basically have sort of this wild, wild west creation here within the state. And so while there might not be legislative things in place to really prevent gun violence, we know that there are things in place that invite more guns, that make them increasingly more available to individuals. And the more availability, the more problems. The easier it is for someone to buy a Glock means that it's easier for someone then to get a Glock switch. And so when you have in a state that invites firearms, that invites the gun industry into the state, these are the sort of consequences a few years, a decade, 20 years you're going to see, is that eventually, whether the guns are being stolen, whether they're being purchased legally, those are just extra weapons being flooded into the market. And so I think some of the things that we could do is maybe try to enact counter legislation that's reasonable and sensible. The idea that someone in this state can have a silencer where the only point of it is to sneak up behind someone and kill them, there's no sort of self-defense value to it. But the fact that we promoted and it's legislation that passed in the state shows you that we are just sort of this nest for gun industry.
I really appreciate what Jacques and Attorney Maxwell said. I think I'm going to come from a different perspective. America is led by gun culture. You see it everywhere in video games, and it's highlighted in our music. And culturally, it is a device used for either protection or to cause harm. I think that if we look at it from the perspective where we have a lot of people, especially those that are perpetuating violence, oftentimes they're given the guns and they're holding the guns in a sense of protection, because the mindset in some of these communities is it's either them or me. And so for me, although I understand the need for legislation, especially when it comes to prosecuting, I want to go a bit before all of that happens. So how do we start to get to a point where young people in our communities, or just people in our communities, have to solve all these issues with guns? And I think at the end of the day, all of these people want to feel safe, and they want to be free. And so how do we start looking at it and making sure that people are both of those things? And with legislation, there comes obviously accountability with laws. If people break the laws, then those people then are incarcerated, and we have another issue. So again, although I truly do believe in accountability, I believe in people being law-abiding citizens, I will also say that I was taught to shoot at the age of 7, and my father kept guns around our whole house. And my mindset at that moment in time as a child, as a young person, and even now as an adult, is not to grab a gun and cause harm to community. So I think we got to dig a little deeper and look at the root causes of why community members feel the need to solve issues with guns. And although there are altered gun laws and things in place and policy in place to protect us from having military-style weapons on civilian streets, I think that there is a deeper issue that we probably need to focus on, especially since we do live in a state that will more than likely continue and perpetuate these type of laws and these types of lack of enforcement around these types of things.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. Really, I think education is key, but accountability is just as important. I don't think that there's enough accountability in the state of Alabama for people that are willing to go beyond just the open carry law. Like everybody on this call, well, I know, let's just say Jacques and people closer to my age, we've always known about places up north and how you can't go there with rifles or pistols or anything because the laws don't allow it. What I say, what I tell my teachers and what I say all the time, children are children. They'll only do what you allow them to do. And if a rule is broken, something as simple as coming to school after 8 o'clock, the rule is that you have to go to and you have to check in. That's an accountability measure. we don't have accountability measures for people out in the streets, or we don't have strict enough accountability measures for people that are out in the streets abusing their gun rights. Like Brother Jacques said, what's the reason of having a gun license when you don't really need it? I talk to children and young adults every day as part of my career, but they continue to come around and speak to me for multiple reasons. And I have an 18-year-old son. I've heard kids say to me that they will carry a gun because they have to act like everyone that they come across has one, and they don't want to be left without, right? Well, what happens if we get some laws? I'm not saying like a zero tolerance thing, but something a little more strict. Now, the unintended consequence is we would then start giving a lot of young people that look like us records and things that they can't get out of. I get it, but when are we going to hold them accountable? Because it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I just think it's time for the legislation to lay the law down and just, I mean, I hate to say zero tolerance. I hate that term, but something pretty close to it.
And real quick, I agree, especially with the maybe not the zero tolerance, but I agree with the idea with the permit and the license. As gun owners, we like the fact that we had to go through a process of getting licensed to carry a weapon, to conceal carry. The idea that we as gun owners believe it's a Second Amendment right for any and everyone to carry a weapon without first going through the sheriff's department and getting the background and getting a license. We don't like that. We appreciate that we have 5-year, 1-year, 2-year licenses, and we carry our licenses proudly. And so but again, it's legislation like that I think had political motivation to appease a certain group of people that have unintended consequences that affect us all. But in reality, gun owners who believers like us in Second Amendment right don't actually agree with that because it creates chaos.
And I actually wanna build on that point, Attorney Maxwell. And you'll see I also pose this in the chat for you as well. But we've seen like a lot of legislative actions taken to prevent gun violence, and how that can inadvertently increase the amount of young men in prison, right? Without addressing the root issues of gun violence. So I was wondering if you could talk about ways you might have seen this play out as a civil rights attorney, specifically, and how these have had impact on any ways that legislators may not have considered when they were writing these laws.
Yeah, so just maybe from two perspectives, I do civil rights, but I also do a lot of criminal defense as well. And so from sort of two perspectives, from a civil rights perspective, obviously when you have major gun culture, and when how it affects young Black individuals, it's essentially everyone has a fear that you have a gun, that you're strapped. You get policed differently, you get looked at differently, you get talked to differently. And so routine situations, whether it's, tail light out or speeding, next thing you know, you have an officer approaching with his hand on his gun, asking you to get out the vehicle, which leads to all kinds of other things. Let's say that the individual may have had something illegal on them or drug on them. From my perspective, that should have never been discovered, but for this officer fearing that there's a weapon. So instead of just doing a normal ticket stop like they would in Homewood or Mountain Brook, they're asking this young man to get out of his vehicle, which could lead to all kinds of things. Someone in the car might have a warrant. They decide to take off running, and then things escalate for no reasons. So from a civil rights perspective, that's sort of the unintended consequence it has. From a criminal perspective, let's look at it on an even more micro level. A lot of different jurisdictions within the state, different counties, different district attorneys, they've implemented programs where basically no matter what the case is, no matter what you've been charged, if you were found to have a gun on you, we're going to make you do mandatory jail time. All right. And they look at things from a punitive and a reactive sort of standpoint, which I also think causes a lot of harm. There are things that could be done from a proactive standpoint from prosecutors, different counties, city prosecutors that would incentivize us to reduce the amount of gun violence and the amount of guns out there. I can't tell you how many defendants that I've represented that if you told them, hey, we're going to literally take 30 days, take 3 months off of your sentence for every gun that you turn in or have, delivered to us, there would be a flood of guns coming in from off the street. That would incentivize folks to take guns off the street instead of saying you got popped with a marijuana second degree, a simple possession, and now we're going to make you serve 30 days in jail because you had a gun on you as well. It's hard to tell these young folks with what's going on here not to be strapped. I know that with all the violence and everything going on, I stay strapped. I have multiple guns, and it's hard to tell someone else who doesn't have my resources and accessibility that they shouldn't have a gun as well in this sort of environment. And let's say they get in trouble with something marijuana, something unrelated, just because they had a gun on them that they legally could carry, they're being treated with punitive measures and going to have to spend additional time in jail because certain counties throughout the state have placed these sort of punitive measures in place, when there are things that we could do to actually get guns off the street that would benefit everyone and have people serving less time in jail. And so I think, from a criminal defense perspective, that's what I'm seeing. From a civil rights perspective, I see the unintended consequences on this war, on having a culture full of guns and everyone scared of young Black people.
Thank you for that answer, Maxwell. It was fantastic. That piggybacks really well into our next question, which is for Austin. Brother Let's Talk has spent the last 7 years working to reduce the stigma of mental health care among Black men in Birmingham. Mr. Austin, could you describe how not having proper resources to deal with stress, anger, grief, and other emotions impacts how a community handles conflict?
Thank you, Eric. And a community being the individuals and the groups that share in their lives together. They work together. They go to school. They live life in the same vicinity and in the same area, and their actions impact one another. Now, when a community lacks proper resources to manage emotions like stress, anger, grief, and other strong feelings, it can have profound and often detrimental effects on how it handles conflict. Emotional wellness and conflict resolution are deeply connected. Without adequate support systems to address and manage emotions, individuals and groups within a community may respond to conflict in unhealthy and destructive ways. And I want to identify 7 different effects that the lack of resources may have on a community. First is the escalation of conflict. If individuals or groups do not have the tools to manage their emotions, feelings like anger, frustration, and grief, it can fester and build. In conflict situations, these unprocessed emotions can escalate the situation, leading to more severe disputes or even violence. Without proper coping mechanisms, people are more likely to react impulsively or defensively during conflicts rather than responding thoughtfully. This can quickly spiral into a us versus them, which Uche kind of spoke of early. Another way is there's poor or ineffective communication. When emotions run high and there are no resources to help people process them, like counseling or community education, communication can break down. Instead of open, empathetic dialogue, people may communicate defensively or aggressively, leading to further misinterpretation and conflict. Active listening is so crucial. If individuals are overwhelmed by emotion and don't know how to manage them, they may fail to listen to others' perspectives, make it more difficult to reach compromise and understanding. Another effect is increased polarization. Without support of managing the grief, the loss, or frustration, that different groups within the community might begin to form silos. It's like each group processing emotions in isolation. And so that can create sort of this us versus them dynamic, where people view others' feelings or needs as irrelevant or opposing, further entrenching that sense of division. In some communities, certain emotions, especially grief or vulnerability, may be stigmatized. Without proper outlets for emotional expression, people may suppress their feeling, leading to more covert forms of conflict and passive aggressive rather than direct and productive dialogue. Another effect is a mental health strain or a burnout. When individuals are unable to manage their emotions effectively, it leads to emotional burnout, mental health crisis, or even physical health issues. Communities that experience high levels of untreated emotional strain may see an increase in substance abuse, depression, or violence, further undermining a sense of collective resilience and their ability to handle future conflicts. In communities where stress and anger are not addressed in a healthy manner, these negative emotional states can become normalized. This creates a cycle of heightened stress and more conflict resolution strategies that perpetuate conflict rather than resolve it. Another effect is it undermines trust. Communities thrive when people trust one another and work together to address collective issues. You remember a period in time where families assisted one another in raising their kids. The people down the street on the corner, 2 or 3 houses, knew your kids and you knew theirs. And when your kids stepped out of line, they didn't have a problem chastising them because there was a sense of trust that we had in our community. But if people feel unsupported emotionally, they are less likely to engage in collaborative problem solving. A lack of emotional resources can lead to a sense of alienation, distrust, and disengagement from the community. In communities without adequate resources for emotional wellness, leadership might struggle to mediate disputes over providing that guidance that's needed. Leaders themselves may also be overwhelmed by their own unaddressed emotional needs, which can lead to poor decision-making and sometimes exacerbate the conflict. And there's a long-term effect on social change. Communities that are unable to address grief and trauma, whether it's from historical injustices, natural disasters, or ongoing violence, they may find it harder to heal or to engage in long-term sustainable change. This can prevent the resolution of deep-seated conflicts as old wounds are never properly addressed. Without healthy emotional regulation, tools that are needed to help a person regulate their emotion, there's a sense of vulnerability. Groups might feel empowered and unable to advocate for their needs in conflict situations, leading to this perpetual inequality or injustice within the community. Then there's a lack of preventive measures. Communities that do not invest in teaching emotional intelligence, stress management, conflict resolution skills from an early age may face more difficulty handling interpersonal and community-wide conflicts. Without these skills, individuals and groups may resort to avoidance or aggression rather than addressing the root causes of conflict. When a community lacks the proper resources to address stress, to address grief, anger, and other emotion, it creates a fertile ground for conflict to become more entrenched, for people to become more divisive and harmful towards themselves and to others. The inability to process emotions in healthy ways can lead to poor communication, reduced trust, and heightened tensions. Emotional intelligence, conflict resolution skills are not only critical for individuals' well-being, but also for the overall health of our community. Providing resources for emotional support, such as mental health services, conflict mediation, educational and community education on emotional wellness. It can help a community better navigate challenges, resolve conflicts peacefully, and build a stronger, more resilient social fabric. There's an African proverb that says, the destruction of a nation begins in the homes of its people. And I often believe that we can't practice something we hadn't been taught. If we're not taught from an early age in our home how to properly address conflict, how to identify and deal with some of these emotions that can lead to conflict, it can lead to dangerous consequences where people go out and commit certain acts or try to find other unhealthy ways of coping with some of those negative emotions. It's important that our community get back to that space of trust with one another, get back to that space of being able to have that confidence in our neighbor assisting one another in helping to raise and build a better community.
And right there, Jacques, I'm gonna stop you right there. I really want to point out just a couple of things. Like when you talk about like these different factors, I think that it really like paints a picture of how it's when we talk about gun violence, there's a multifaceted approach that has to happen. And for the people watching, I just want to paint the picture of what we're experiencing here now, because we have on one end, we have Attorney Maxwell who's talking to us about legally what happens with like the ramifications and issues that are exacerbated with legislation when it comes to gun violence. We're getting that mental health piece and what is happening specifically when we're talking about what goes into the psyche and the mindset that would lead someone. And we've all been talking about that throughout this call, about like the idea of safety is really a huge thing that we're talking about here and what that means. And next, I'm going to be moving us to, he talked about the youth. I love the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. I feel like when we're looking at myself, Eric, Uche, we're part of that like last generation that got the, everybody in the whole community. You're raised by the village. But Principal Hayes, I want to pull this over to you. When we talk about the mindset, right? There's a lack of resources. We all know when it comes to public school and public education. And while addressing the lack of resources and support for adults is crucial, there's also a huge gap when we're looking at providing our youth with healthy conflict resolution strategies. So from your experience as a principal and a leader among young people, what do you see as the most pressing needs to support our youth effectively? And are there any areas or needs that you feel are currently being overlooked or inadequately addressed?
Well, thank you. Let me be clear. I know people love to say in public education we don't have, or there is a lack of resources. That's the furthest thing from the truth. We have an abundance of resources. Sometimes we have too many resources, and too much of anything is not great, because sometimes the directions can overlap or either go the opposites, right? So we have the resources. I actually believe we have more resources in places that are considered Title I or less fortunate than some of the over the mountain places, right? We have tons of government support. The city is giving the schools everything. Students have devices, and they just have an abundance of everything, all kind of mental health resources, legal, health, whatever you need, educational resources. We even have the arts collab in. So they have just an abundance. What I think, honestly, I think one of the most pressing needs to support our youth is that we have to meet them where they are, right? We can't counsel anyone out. We can't say, oh, they're of this age, let's forget about them. But we got to reach them early, right? I remember back in my days when I was young, I still remember DARE, right? I know you youngsters don't remember DARE, but I'll bet you that Austin does, and perhaps Attorney.
Hey, we know DARE. We know DARE.
Okay, right? You knew about it, but you didn't.
Don't call me one of them young
education.
folks.
Right.
Don't do
You
that
didn't
to me.
start DARE in high school. You started in probably the first and second grade, and you remembered it coming up. You have to reach them early on. And so for me, and I always tell, I know Jacques Austin, that's actually my frat brother, line brother, all of that. I was going to press the buzzer on you, Jacques, because you was over your 5 minutes.
I got excited. My bad.
It's okay, man. I know you're passionate about it, and I am too, but I promise I'm going to stay under 5 minutes. But for me, I often talk about seeing males in the building, right? No disrespect to Uche and the females, but oftentimes we have a limited amount of positive role models or male role models where students, young students can see a positive person in their life that happens to be a male. I use this example oftentimes in the state of Alabama or in the South. 9 times out of 10, and I'm gonna ask you, Eric, you answer this. We hadn't talked about it. I'm just gonna put you on the spot. In the South, if something happens in the home where the child has to be removed from the home, 9 times out of 10, that child is going to go with who? Mom. If that child, for whatever reason, that child cannot go with mom, who does that child go with?
Grandma.
If for whatever reason that child cannot go with grandma, who does that child go to? Aunt or cousin. And then you may go on the dad's side, but you 9 times out of 10 are not going to dad or uncle. You're going to dad's mom, dad's sister, dad's aunt. So no disrespect to the women. My mom raised me alone. We have some beautiful, strong women in America, right? We should have had one leading the country, but that's a whole completely different conversation. I'm not going to get on that one. But let me back this up, right? But they don't know how to interact with men, right? They just don't. And Jacques can attest to this from being in the school, Eric as well. You walk up to some of the youngsters and you say something to them, and they're either amazed that you're there and you're confident enough to even speak with them and or teach them something, or they are afraid and they reject any kind of interaction with you. And it's more rejection than anything else. So what I say is the most pressing thing is for us to reach them where they are. Like everybody on this call, besides Eric, besides you, well, I don't know, y'all, Jacques and Uche, y'all in the school all the time. But if it was 20 people on this call, I would guarantee you 15 hadn't stepped foot in a school setting since they left. But they want to talk about from the outside of what the educational system needs to do to get better. You know why I don't write prescriptions? Because I'm not a doctor, right? I'm an educational professional. So I am in the school and I see it firsthand. Attorney Maxwell, I'm not a civil rights attorney. So I cannot tell you anything about your job, but I can tell you about education and reaching young children. I just think that in the city of Birmingham, it's time for us to just come together, reach our youth. And that goes all the way up to high school, but we have to start with the younger ones. Even it's research shows that by the time a child turns 10 years old, double digits, their personality is set. They are who they are. At that point, it's a terrible thing to say, but oftentimes, unless something switches, the writing is on the wall for that kid's path, unless somebody grabs them and changes their mindset. By the time they're 10, I want you to think about that. 10 years old, that's a true baby, right? They are that's a baby. We have to reach them early on, teach them, raise them up. And, you know, just like government offices, it's a reason why you have 4-year terms, because you normally don't see the change until the end of the second or the third year. So, but we got to start somewhere. I don't think I answered all of your questions, but I'm going to yield my time.
And quick before we go to the next question, thank you, Principal Higgins. I just want to let the audience know, of course, that Justice in Focus is a nonpartisan initiative that invites the community to reimagine public safety.
My bad.
You're good. But the issue of public safety is a nonpartisan issue, and it's something that we should all care about. So we just want to make that clarify that. You're good, Principal Wiggins. Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Appreciate you, really appreciate you, man. Always on top of it. Let's switch over to Uche. As we've discussed, there are multiple approaches to gun safety. There isn't one fix-all answer. We've heard from education, we've heard from law, we've heard from mental health. Uche, your role with the city of Birmingham combines all of these efforts. Can you explain how you prioritize which actions to take and explain Birmingham's overall approach to reducing crime in the state?
So I think I'll try to be as succinct, unlike my brothers in purple over here. Anyway, I think that when we're talking gun safety, so I want to be very clear. My job is strictly focused on gun violence, not crime, just gun violence. It was found, the Surgeon General announced that gun violence is a public health crisis. That's how people in this space really look at it, like a disease. In what way do you stomp out a disease? So I'm not a doctor, but you can just imagine if you've been diagnosed with a disease, you go to the doctor, they tell you what you have, and then they give you a pathway to getting back healthy. And so it could be a multitude of things. It might be surgery. It might be changing your diet. It might be, if it's cancer, maybe it's radiation or chemo. But you have pathways to healing yourself. Or maybe you want to go the holistic route. Maybe you want to go be vegan. So yes, it's very imperative that we look at gun violence as a public health crisis, and we look at it as a disease that is really affecting overly communities of color disproportionately. The saying goes that when America gets a cold, then Black America gets the flu. And so the profiles that we analyze with the work that we do directly focus on people that would be considered high risk. And, I hate to say it, a lot of people call it stereotypes. But if we don't identify the issues, and especially the root causes of the issues and why we're here, then there's no way that we can find solutions. So instead of using the word stereotype, I think it's called a diagnosis. And so standardly, the folks that we are seeing affected by this type of violence, it happens in a lot of urban communities. And it's not just a pinpoint to poverty, it's literally a pinpoint to intentional divestment in communities, whether it be public schools, whether it be those communities that have public housing. And there are resources, but Principal Wiggins said it himself, it's how these resources are allocated and how they're directed. And so I will tell you right now, we're looking at a multifaceted and comprehensive approach with the city of Birmingham that's dedicated not only to the mental health piece, which is super important. It's not only dedicated to teaching conflict resolution or even mentorship in our schools, but it's also dedicated to looking at the person as a whole. So on the front end, you have a child and they matriculate through the school system. Where were the gaps? And you can't blame just the teachers or the school, but there might have been some gaps in their family and the people that they're surrounded by, their guardians, which is not always their fault. This is cyclical. This is something that we're seeing from generation to generations in cycles of violence. So something happens to that child, they decide as they get older, they're missing that mental health piece, they're missing that mentorship, they're missing that good principal in Principal Wiggins, they're missing that good licensed therapist in Mr. Austin, and they don't have the pathway to know where they need to go. And so maybe they do decide to pick up a gun, and maybe they do decide because culture has lended that to them that they're going to do that. So maybe they're a victim of gun violence. Maybe they fit that high risk profile. How do we start to make that person whole? How do we start to support them if they do perpetuate violence, if they're the victim of gun violence? So we're looking at it comprehensively. We're looking at it from the time that a person in community is born all the way to the time where they may be either a victim, they may perpetrate it. Their families are victims. The communities are dealing with this violence and they're also victims. And also recovering. Like, so what Mr. Austin mentioned, the mental health piece. So it's not just the person that's been shot. We're also talking about the community that's dealing with this. Cycles of violence are now becoming so normal in our communities that I was speaking to some people from the medical community, and y'all can't imagine how many folks have come into our ERs with gunshot wounds. It is now so common. That is one of the most common wounds that they're seeing because so many people are getting shot. How do we make that person whole? How do we make community whole? And finally, if someone does have to go into the justice system, as Attorney Maxwell mentioned, how are we supporting them to make them whole when they come out? And how are we supporting their family and their children? So the comprehensive approach is not just focused on overall crime, it's community safety. It is making sure that in every instance of these cycles of violence that we're providing support, resources, and fundings, and the organizations that do the work on the front end and the back end are supported. And we also, most importantly, are looking at how do we intervene? So how do we stop retaliatory crime and violence? How do we stop people from perpetuating the violence that they think is going to bring them some type of wholeness or restitution, because it's not, and it continues generation after generation. So I know that's kind of high level, but there's multiple programs. We've also done a lot of research and looked at multiple cities all over the country and looked at best practices and found that we are no different from any other city on a national level. I think now that we're at a cusp that we have to be very intentional about how we support community. And it's not about attacking police or attacking anybody. It's fully about how do we start to reinvest intentionally into our community.
Well, as you know, Uche, you mentioned it being high level, but like as you know, you're one of the people in this call that I talk a lot, talk with a lot about this community safety issue, and there's so many facets to it. But on that high level, I think that it's important for us to understand when we talk about a comprehensive approach, it takes both short-term solutions and long-term solutions. This is something that we're talking about an issue that essentially has developed over, and I'm not gonna get too much in my bag because we're in time because of time, but this has been developing over 400 years, right? We're talking about issues that have deep roots, and we could go another hour. We really could. We really could. I wanted to hop into the panel and not be a moderator, but they say, "Hey, you got to moderate." I'm like, "Okay, I'll moderate." So as we bring this discussion to a close, and we get ready to head into the Q&A portion as time allows, I want to acknowledge that we understand that there are solutions that must come quickly, right? As lives continue to be impacted by this community safety issue. So for the panelists, like keeping in mind that yes, there are long-term solutions that we are working on. There are people who are being impacted daily and are wondering what can be done right now. So I want to open this up to everyone on the panel, but what are some, I don't want to call them solutions, but what are some immediate steps that policymakers and communities can take to reduce the harm within our communities, without depending on the prison system of, okay, we're just gonna lock everybody up. I don't have that ability, right? What is the immediate steps that we can take to reduce harm within our communities?
Yeah, I'll start off. I think I often say this, and Brother Austin said it pretty well, and Ms. Bean kind of brought it up too. If we don't go back to some old school ways, now I get it. We're in this new tech age, this revolutionary age where we have to do, things to stay abreast and to stay ahead of times. But if we don't go back to some old school ways in our community, we're going to continue to lose generations of children. I mean, and when I say old school ways, like I mean things such as reading books, setting bedtime, setting boundaries, our neighbors holding each other accountable, us holding each other accountable, neighborhoods being neighborhoods. Like I live in a pretty decent neighborhood, and I'm part of the blame. I don't know all of my neighbors, but I knew all of my grandparents' neighbors when I was younger. I had friends and just outside and being around. I knew I couldn't go in everyone's home because that's what my parents taught me. But everybody was welcoming, and it was just a real community. And it wasn't just in that neighborhood, it was everywhere. Now it's everybody's individualized and everybody's in survival mode. And I think until we change that mindset, I'm not going to say what I want to say, but I just think we need to change that mindset immediately. I don't want to get in any more trouble on Hill. So, all right.
I'll go if y'all don't mind. I think you all can see my vibe on the call. I really, one of my focus is to make sure that everyone is safe. And safety looks different to everyone. It's not just a one size fits all. I think making communities whole and then empowering communities and finally Y'all making sure everyone's free. I've volunteered for organizations that work for parole reform, and so that's something that I'm just passionate about outside of it. People need to be held accountable, but if there's a way that we can find to make sure that folks stay free, I think that that's extremely important. Outside of that, immediately, I think I said it earlier, intentional investment in not just one programs, but really an ecosystem. It's not one, it's all. And that means, as I like to say, all hands on deck. So whether it is Principal Wiggins reading to some children, whether it's Mr. Austin providing mental health support to community, whether it's Attorney Maxwell continuing his work in civil rights and helping people that deserve freedom to be free. I think we all play a vital role in this, and I'll include my brothers at the Flourish, whether it's Eric or Jerone, helping these youth realize their potential and their gift and give them hope. That's, I think, part of it. I know it doesn't seem immediate, but every piece plays a real vital role, and it helps the work that's being done on the ground with additional organizations and entities. It helps really fuel them. So, and I think more than anything, community needs to be empowered and know that the hope really lies in them. The final thing is, when we're talking about violence in communities, y'all, it's barely even 1% of the population perpetuating these types of crimes and violence, like gun violence in our community. So if you could just think of that, Birmingham has roughly 200,000 people in it. So we're talking not even 200 people that are involved in these cycles of violence and perpetuating them. So if you can't tell me that 200,000 or let's say 198,000 people can't take 200 people, I don't know what to tell you. When I say take, I mean that in peace. So I think that we think of it that way, and we work together, then there's nothing that we cannot accomplish when it comes to changing the pathway and the trajectory of our community members.
I'll jump in next, and I'll be brief because I know it took a lot of time on the other end. But from a mental health perspective, I'd say it's crucial that, we know the community is built of groups, and groups are built of individuals. And as an individual, how do you handle conflict? As an individual, what are you teaching others about how to handle conflict? I talked with the group, I think on Sunday, and they were stressing the importance of mentoring and talking to a young man who they see that may be doing something that can lead to violence, or being able to come and approach them. And I interjected, I said, well, what if that young man steps to you wrong and says something out of pocket that you're not able to deal with? Have you identified your own issues and got to a space where you're able to address them? And so, again, I talk about being able to, you can't practice something that you hadn't been taught. And then sometimes there's unwillingness to address some of those issues. I think it's important to be able to identify where are you with your emotional wellness? Where are you with your mental health? And being able to teach others about the importance of their own emotional wellness, which leads to understanding conflict resolution, understanding how they deal with conflict, how they process certain situations, and also teaching some of those coping mechanisms that are necessary for dealing with anxiety, dealing with grief, with frustration, with anger, that their only solution isn't violence, that they understand and know that there are other options to deal with what they're dealing with, to be able to process it in an appropriate way that doesn't lead to a negative consequence.
And then finally, just one of the things that I think that would be instrumental in changing the direction of lives. When I was came out of law school, I started at the Equal Justice Initiative, and we did something there that really spoke to me, and we do it individually as our whole law firm, and other lawyers do it as well. It's something that I called Expose Straight. We saw a lot of programs where they would scare young people straight, And we never thought that actually worked, where they would take them to the jails or the morgues, all those sort of things. But it really actually didn't really have an effect on them, and it didn't work. But if we expose them to other things they didn't know was possible, that right there had a major effect. And so we would bring in students, and a lot of them would say, I want to be an NBA player, or I want to be a rapper, or I want to be a nurse. And we said, well, what about becoming a lawyer? What about becoming a civil rights activist or an advocate? But it wasn't just enough to expose them to that. They needed to see sort of the, I don't want to get in trouble, but the luxury side of it. They needed to see that becoming an athlete, becoming a rapper, becoming whatever it is, wasn't the only way for them to achieve some of the goals and things that they envisioned for themselves. I know here at our firm, we partner with some organizations where they'll bring 4 or 5 young folks in with us, and they'll spend the day with us. They'll go to lunch with us, whether we're going to lunch downtown at a nice restaurant, or we're meeting with other judges in the courtroom, or they're sitting in the conference rooms and the battle rooms, and we're going through cases with them, or going to Regents games with us and sitting in the booth up there with us, showing them that there's something else and something more that they can achieve and want to become. And so whenever we did that, and we'd ask them at the end of the day, the amount of answers, I want to be a sports writer. Well, we didn't even think about that before, but we introduced them to some beat writers at the game. They wanted all kinds of things. They wanted to become a chef because we took them in the back of the kitchen I forget the restaurant downtown, Chez Fonfon. We took them back there to meet them. And so now all of a sudden, these kids who didn't know that all these other things were available to them, it becomes their minds open up. And so whether it's Alabama Power, Southern Company, Regions, all these organizations are willing, just by if they're being asked by a principal, a counselor, or someone to say, hey, I want you to have 5 of my kids shadow you once a month to do these. They would love to do it. They would love to take the photos with them, to post it on their Instagram, on their Facebook. These companies will love it. And so I think that's a source we could utilize as well when we expose kids to things that they typically wouldn't get exposure to say, hey, go over here with Dr. Cheryl and help us prep for a surgery. They would love to do those sort of things, and it'd be exposed that way to just open them up. And I think that right there, from a seed sort of perspective, from a young mind, could open the door to go down a path that could have a tremendous effect on us as far as crime and other things, because they, our young folks, are going in the right direction. Also, truancy court. It doesn't make sense why, when COVID happened, we got a big gap of kids that just disappeared from school. And a lot of those kids right now are the ones that we're seeing on the TVs when the shootings and folks getting locked up. And so we gotta do something about that. It doesn't make sense for 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds not be going to school. Somebody needs to be held accountable. That's it.
And thank you. We're gonna take a couple questions from the audience. We're gonna ask, though, because we're right at time, we're gonna ask just to be concise with these. I'm gonna turn it over to Eric for our first one that we had coming from Rishi Pakra.
Yes, Rishi asks, what are the steps to getting the legislation that Attorney Maxwell and others mentioned passed here in Alabama?
Well, what I mentioned wasn't necessarily legislation based. That's things that, and I was hoping that DA Carr would be on here. Those are policies that individuals, as the head law enforcement officer of the county, can implement immediately with the stroke of a pen or direction they want to go, whether they want to target certain individuals, or have punitive sort of punishments for those who have guns, or have incentivized them to turn in more guns, because it actually helps them out and helps them on the front end with their time. And so, legislatively, like they always say, bang on the doors. In our office, we have a legislator in here, Tillman. Pull up on them. and you could tell them I said it. Go to the front door of the office and tell them what it is that you want to see, because closed mouths don't get fed.
Look, don't be surprised when I start
right
banging
now,
on your
door. Right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait till 10. I'll be like, hey, Leroy sent me.
Right, do
it. Last one for y'all. We had talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to get like the concise version, because this is I feel like this is a question that y'all are all addressing, but if you could turn it into like one phrase, for a community member, how can they get involved with violence prevention effort? Like, what is one, like if you could turn it into one phrase for our community members to leave with, how they can get involved with violence prevention?
One statement would be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. You don't be the one that's out there committing acts or making sure that those that are in your bubble aren't the ones that are out there doing that. Whatever it is that you got to do, that you got to say to your cousin, uncle, brother, sister, mother, whoever it is, do that so they aren't a part of the problem, that you all are part of the solution.
Yeah, I would just say when opportunities present themselves, show up.
I kind of piggyback on what Principal Wiggins said. I think there's a lot of opportunities to tap in, and I think we're kind of in a society that doesn't always want to be as engaged. So just get involved. There's so many opportunities, so many ways. Get involved. Find your gift and let it use you.
Utilize your resources and allow young people to be exposed to them. If you're going to the dentist, ask your dentist if my cousin could come hang out with you for a day. If you're around a principal, ask the principal if my nephew could come shadow you for a day. Utilize your resources and expose young folks.
Thank y'all, and thank y'all for being concise on that too, because now I get to jump in with my concise phrase. One thing I picked up from the four of y'all in here throughout this talk was, I saw the word flashing across the screen when we're talking about community and how this is impacting communities. And I think that one of those solution steps that people can do is communicate. Like, communities don't happen without communication. And y'all have each talked about this in a different way. But all of them stemmed in some way, shape, or form down to communicating. So I think that we can't have community without communicating, without communing, without unifying. Like, these are all words that come from the same root. So it's important for you to talk to that person, talk to yourself, talk to a therapist, talk to your school official, talk to the attorney, communicate. Even this happened because we were willing to pick up the phone and communicate with these individuals. Well, I'm very glad we're able to come in here and really give. I learned, and I've been working in schools since 2014. I've been working in community since 2016. I ain't spent no time in law. I ain't gonna lie, Maxwell, but I got a therapist. I've been learning. So as we come to the end of this important conversation, I really do want to thank everyone for participating, for sharing your insights, and of course for y'all's commitment to finding meaningful solutions to the issue of gun violence in our communities. Like we mentioned, today's discussion emphasized that community safety is a multifaceted challenge requiring collective action, thoughtful reforms, and a willingness to collaborate across different sectors. Together, we have the power to advocate for policy changes, to support initiatives and that prioritize the well-being of our citizens, to hold each other accountable, and to continue doing these things as we move towards a safer future. So to those watching, we encourage you to continue this conversation, to communicate in your communities, to get involved in violence prevention efforts, and to remain engaged as we work towards better public safety solutions. You can always stay connected and informed with Justice in Focus by following Alabama Values at ALA Values on social media or visiting alvalues.org. And you can tap in with us at the Flourish Alabama and all the work we do at theflourishala.com or on social media at the Flourish Alabama. Thank y'all so much. And until next time, we encourage you to continue reimagining public safety. Y'all enjoy y'all's night.
Thank you.